item before we get to our military workshop. And the first item will be the CDBG entitlement program. Mr. Manager? Oh, we need a roll call. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Bell?
Here.
Vice Mayor Burgess?
Here.
Councilwoman Sierra?
Here.
Councilwoman Nobles?
Here.
Councilman McCormick?
Here.
Councilman Nelson?
Here.
Councilwoman Waldman?
Thank you. Mr. Manager?
Mayor, council members, as you recall, in the past we approved the CDBG work program. This is practically a requirement by the federal government for us to start receiving the grants. There was an advertisement for a workshop for tonight, and I think one of the requirements to open it to the public for comments and all that stuff. I want to turn it over, to be very brief, to Lauren and to introduce the consultants who are working on the plan, and the consultants would be pleased to answer any questions you may have with the general public.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We've hired Nancy Phillips and Associates to help us do the whole setup for this Community Development Block Grant Entitlement Program, and we have here Calvin Knowles, who works with Nancy through Meridian Community Services, and Diana Gonzalez, who's back here, who's helping us develop the program. And I'm going to turn it over to Calvin to give you guys a brief introduction to it and then open it up for your comments and questions.
Good evening. My name is Calvin Knowles. I work for a consulting firm named Meridian Community Services Group, and we do quite a bit of work with Nancy Phillips and Associates, and we're assisting in developing the consolidated plan for the city of Homestead. And I'm going to be very brief and just give you some background on why we're here and what we're working on. So when you see these documents in subsequent weeks, you'll understand what they are. Basically, Homestead is growing up. You've reached a trigger. You've reached the 50,000 people mark, and what that means is now you're eligible to start receiving certain federal money directly rather than going through the state. And the piece of money we're concerned with especially is the Community Development Block Grant. And the city will be eligible to receive about $780,000 a year for the foreseeable future based on your population. As this new census comes out in 2010, there might be a change in that up or down. It just depends because you guys haven't had a census since 2000. But right now what we're dealing with is about $780,000, and the reason you're here tonight, the reason I'm speaking to you, we're having a public hearing, is because HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, is the federal agency that oversees this money, and they're very interested in the public participation process and ensuring that you have heard the public and you've heard your nonprofit providers and your community leaders to hear what their views are on needs of the community. And the reason I'm here tonight is to listen to any views the council might have or any questions you might have about this program, and also to give the public an opportunity to comment on the availability of these funds. And we do have some representatives here, I know, from Habitat for Humanity, for example. Let me just spend very few minutes giving you a background on CDBG, what it is, what you can use it for, what you can't use it for, and then I'll open it up for your questions and for public comment. If you have any questions after this meeting, or if you just want to ask us questions, just go through Lauren, or you can contact me directly through email or by phone, and I'll be happy to talk to you about that. The block grant program is basically a program that was developed as a consolidation of a lot of smaller programs back in the 70s. It's been around ever since. And the block grant program basically is designed to benefit low and moderate income residents of your community. It can be used for a lot of things. It can be used for any number of infrastructure projects if those projects benefit low-income neighborhoods. It can be used for certain kinds of housing activities, although construction of new housing is generally precluded. It can be used for any number of public facilities. One of the exclusions is general government buildings. You can't use block grant money, for instance, to build city halls. You can use it to build, for example, social service centers, clinics, daycare centers, things like that. You can also use the funds to build any number of nonprofit facilities if those facilities are serving a low to moderate income clientele or a clientele presumed to be low to moderate income, like people living with AIDS or migrant farm workers. A lot of different things you can use it for. So what we're doing is we're on a kind of a compressed schedule here. We have to develop a plan pretty quickly. So we had a meeting last week, a public input meeting. We are having this meeting tonight, and then we'll have some meetings through this summer to develop a plan. Now, one thing you should please bear in mind is that we're going to be developing these documents rather quickly. So we want to make sure you have a comfort level with those documents. If there's something that perhaps could be changed, we can change things at a later date. The critical thing to remember is we really need to make sure we get a document into HUD this year. And we can always change and amend as we go through. Having said that, I'll just give you some very brief thoughts on the way I've seen other communities develop these plans. It's very common for communities to use these funds for infrastructure and to set aside a portion of the funds for nonprofit groups. Some housing is done. I will say that frequently communities tend to use other sources of funds for housing, like SHIP and home. And that's all I have to say. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
Thank you. Mr. Manager?
Mayor, council members, just let you know, this morning I had discussion with Joanna and Lauren and Dan about the capital projects. Practically we have to have it completed in my office by the 12th. Of course, the list of projects is, we're not short of projects to be done there. Me and Joanna later had a discussion about the particular project we'd like to concentrate on, and I think Joanna, if she didn't already talk to the consultants, she will be talking to them tonight about it and move forward. Of course, we will come to you before we are finalizing this list. But I can assure you there's lots of projects can be done by this money, and hopefully we will be using this money for many years to come.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We look forward to this plan as well. Any comments from council? This is a public hearing. Any comments or questions from the public?
Yes.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Jimmy Williams, 550 Southwest 10th Avenue, Homestead. Quick question on how will the funds be dispersed, and what will be the priorities that will be listed to see what areas are more important for the money to be used?
If I may address that, the funds will be dispersed according to the consolidated plan and the action plan, which are currently being developed. And as far as the dispersal of the funds, there are requirements that they be used to benefit low-income residents. So really, at this point, that's about as far as we've gotten.
So like blighted areas and different things of that could be used.
Certainly the intent of the funds is to improve the lives of low and moderate income residents. And it's based on, eligibility is based on census tract data. And right now, actually, majority of the census tracts in the city of Homestead are considered low income.
Okay. I think that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you. Thank you very much, and we look forward to more input. We look forward to see the plan. We look forward to have other hearings as well. So this is step one, basically. So there will be much more to come. This is just step one of the CDBG program. So thank you very much. Nothing else? We're going to go ahead and move on to item 4, special presentations, Homestead Air Reserve Base Joint Land Use Study presentation. And we're just going to open the floor up and welcome Homestead Air Reserve Base. We're so glad to have you all here with us this evening. I know we have Colonel Binger, Colonel McCulley, and Mr. Ventura. So welcome. We're so glad to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Colonel Mike McCulley. I'm with the 42nd Mission Support Group at Homestead Air Reserve Base. Some administrative notes here. First of all, I'd like to introduce my new boss, Colonel William Binger. He's just arrived here, and he'd like to say a couple of words.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Mayor Bell and the council, thanks for having us out here today. This, I think you'll find very informative, a very important briefing, because after all, we have common interest here. I'm the new commander. I've been out, at the base for a week now, so I got a whole week under my belt. And there's many folks in this room that have the history of the studies that you're going to hear. But again, back to the common interest. My main concern is for safety, and after that it's economic development and prosperity, because we all win when we have all three of those elements. So again, thanks for having us out here. I look forward to working with you all, and I look forward to hearing this brief for the first time as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the plan that we
Mr.
have...
McCulley, I think the manager is wanting to give a greeting as well. Mr. Manager?
I have to justify my salary, so please forgive me. No, but it's just, we've been working with the Air Base for a while now, but the JLU study and the ACU study, the Brown one in 2007, and just for the benefit of the people who are sitting here who are not directly involved, or people who are watching it on camera, believe it or not, there's a camera out there, they tape everything here. It's just the purpose of the workshop. The military have a consultant they retain, I think, from Virginia, that they normally you consult them for all military issues regarding development and all that stuff. And we have the lady who did the JLO study. She doesn't really represent the city of Homestead, but she was an independent consultant who did this study. And we wanted to bring her here firsthand to do the presentation, and the public, if they have any questions, to ask her. Unfortunately, not too many people had the opportunity when it was first done to ask questions, both sides, of course. I know initially this request was to have this done in a council meeting, and we had a meeting with Colonel McCulley and Larry Ventura, and we thought 15 minutes doesn't really give the Air Base or the public justice to be able to be familiar with what's going on in for the Air Base and the city. And we decided, under the guidance of the mayor, that we're going to have a workshop. This is scheduled for 2 hours, so we have exhibits. The presentations are going to be done, questions and answers, and people also can walk around and ask the consultants questions. And of course, the staff, we have the city attorney with us, we have the city planner, and I also want to introduce Liz. She's the consultant for the JLUs, and I think she does this. She's coming from Atlanta, and she does this all over the country. So with this, I trust the question.
Thank you. Mr. McCulley, Colonel McCulley, the floor is yours.
Well, the plan we have tonight is to go ahead and work in both a number of issues that are interest to the public concerning the base. We'd like tonight to present the ACUS study first, and that'll be done by our consultant, Mr. Phil Hubert. He's sitting right here. He is from Marstel Day. It's a consulting group that we've had on the books to provide assistance to the base, and he comes with a great deal of knowledge concerning the accident potential zones and also economic development around military bases. So we're glad to have him here tonight. After that, we'd like to ask Ms. Drake, who you mentioned earlier, to come up and then do the JLUS study. And then after that, we can, if it's okay with the council and the open forum that we're trying to do, bring it up to an open forum and sense of questions and that kind of thing. But I have a couple of statements I'd like to do both at the beginning and then at the end of the presentation, so we can kind of wrap this up at the end and then, do a dialogue, and that's what we want to do tonight. But of course, what the Colonel Binger mentioned about the issues with economic development, the base itself, and those kind of things. We've had a proud history being here in the local area since 1942, and the base has always been part of both the state of Florida, the county, and the city, and henceforth the namesake that we have today. But we've had many ups and downs, hurricanes, but we've all done that in a great partnership, and the history proves that. So we've been very blessed, if you want to call it that, with the development of our local community and also what's around the base. The base itself, of course, provides an economic impact of about $200 million plus on an annual basis in the sense of that support to the local community. But we also have our family, friends, and other folks, and again, I've said it before here, I'm a homeowner and proud of it in the city of Homestead, so it's great to be here. But as my boss said, public safety, and again, economic development is what we're looking at. But the real issue here is the base realignment committees and the issues and the process that goes with that, and what we call bracket-proofing the base, in a sense, and that's definitely a partnership of all those entities that I mentioned earlier. So we're an economic force in the area. Also, we're an environmental force in the area, if you want to call us that. We provide a great buffer to the Key Biscayne area and the environmental programs that we have on the base to protect our natural resources. But the base itself is a national asset. We're very much a stepping stone, if you want to call us that, or support, both to a national level, international level, to South America and other areas in the sense of relief to everything from Haiti to South America to the issues that go with that, but also to support to the local community if there is a natural disaster. We've proven that by bringing in water, ice, plastic for roofs when we have a hurricane, and our manpower is directed to promote public safety, and that's what our dictate is, to help our brothers and sisters in the local community. But we've had the JLUs and ACUs in the process for quite a while, and what we're looking for tonight is to inform the public, but also look at the way ahead for not so much the adoption of those particular documents, those two documents in what we call a military overlay, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but a military overlay district is what encapsulates all of that process. So I'm going to go ahead and start off those issues, and we want to talk about the economic development that other parts have concerning what happens around the base, and that's important. We want to recognize that. We want the city to be healthy and grow. We want the community to do that, but we also want to make sure that the protection for the base is such that we, again, as the Chinese proverb puts out, is that we plant a tree today and have fruit in the 7th generation. So we're looking for long-term support from the community to do that, and that's what this process does. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Phil Huber once again. He will start the process off with a briefing for the ACUs. And now, is there any questions before I sit down and come back at the end of this? Any public questions? Okay. Mr. Huber, you're up.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. My name is Phil Huber. I'm with Marchdale Day. We are supporting the Homestead Air Reserve Base. I've been asked this evening to give you an overview of the most recent air installation compatible use zone study for the Homestead Air Reserve Base. I would like to, with your permission, and rather than keep saying air installation compatible use zone study, use the acronym ACUS. So when you hear me use that term, I'm speaking about that study. In so giving this overview, my intent is to focus on the information in the study and how that information is derived. That's an important element of the study because it gives you a better understanding and appreciation of why is it there are safety zones, why is it there are noise contours, and what would I as a planner or local community leader do with that information once that's shared with me. This study was commissioned based on the BRAC 2005 commission to increase the number of aircraft at the Homestead Air Reserve Base. Therefore, this study was done to address those kinds of issues. It was not the study you used in your joint land use study. It was the 2004 that you used in that study. The differences between the two are marginal, primarily in the noise area. And so, even though I'm speaking to the 2007 study, it's not significantly different than the 2004 study. Okay. Every study of this nature, ACUs or other similar studies that the Department of Defense has, always starts out a study by putting the installation in context. And we've heard the term interest used by 2 speakers already. These studies do the same thing. So my first slide speaks to what is commonly the most issue that is of interest to all parties, and that's economics of an installation. And in this case, you can see from the slide what that value is that the air base brings to the community. Also of importance to the community is the fact that this air base has the opportunity to grow and is in fact under consideration for future mission alignment of the F-35, the most current fighter that will be coming out in the inventory. Growth for the community and growth for the installation is beneficial to all. We've heard that. That's a theme I think you're going to hear from every speaker this evening. This slide speaks to the ACUS program in general. The ACUS program is a Department of Defense program. Each service, the Air Force as well as the other services, has taken the DoD program and developed their own service regulations and characteristics of how they do their studies and what criteria they use. However, you will find these 4 elements common to all ACUS studies. The first is the focus on the issues that the ACUS study addresses. Typically, there are 3 issues. The first is safety. That's represented by accident potential zones. The second is noise, represented by sensitive noise land uses. And the third is tall structures. That is potential hazards to aircraft operations in the vicinity of an airfield and or interruption to radar operations for air traffic control. So typically an ACUS study, no matter what service, addresses those 3. The second thing an ACUS study will always address are land uses, compatible and incompatible. And that's determined based on those factors I just mentioned. Those are always included in the ACUS studies because what is it that the installation in this case the DoD is looking for is the assistance of local communities with the tool of land use planning to help them to do what? The third goal. And that is to focus on preserving the mission of the installation and its operational capability. Very important. In prior BRAC commissions, 2 of the 8 factors had to do with encroachment and encroachment-related kinds of information. A number of installations in the United States are probably closed or significantly reduced in their operations due to those issues. Here you have a case where an installation is fairly encroachment-free, and very much the installation is very much wanting to protect that, as are the communities. These studies help promote that goal. And then, of course, the last item in an ACUS study is the recommendations that come out of the study itself. Typically, the recommendations in an ACUS study are focused on land use regulation type solution sets. Not all of them, but most. And that, of course, is in the purview of local governments, cities, counties, townships, parishes, depending on the state you're in. So ACUS studies typically have those components as a major portion of them. What I'll do now is I'll start going into a little bit more detail on these components, again, to help build that understanding and knowledge. An ACUS has 2 basic components to it. The first is what I call the classical study component. That is, I collect information, I analyze that information or data, and then I record all that in a report. Now, a report by itself has value, but not unless it's shared. And that's the second component of ACUS programs, the element associated with sharing the information, particularly with community leaders. In this case, the ACUS program mandates that information be shared with community leaders in order to put it into the hands of those who have the greatest opportunity and ability to deal with compatible land use issues. That's done in many forms. That can be done in simple briefings to communities and other stakeholder groups. That can be publishing of information in the local newspaper. That can be publishing the ACU study and summary information on websites, which in the case of the Homestead Air Reserve Base, the ACU study is on their website and downloadable to anyone who's interested in the details of the study. This is what the study looks like. And a summary for those who don't want to read all this. This can be very technical, somewhat boring, and somewhat not understandable if you don't appreciate what's in it. So we like to put it in the hands and make sure people can understand and use it. There are, however, other mechanisms to share this information. One of those mechanisms you have participated in this community with the air base, and that is a joint land use study. That is very much a collaborative effort on the part of the installation, local community leaders, other key stakeholders, who typically take an ACU study, its recommendations, analyze it, evaluate it, look at it, and determine what is practical and feasible within the context of those communities. A very effective technique used by just about all the services in DOD. But it is not the only technique. The other technique, and probably one that's probably the most important, is that the installation participate in the community's local land use planning processes. And that's what the third bullet represents. In the case here of the Homestead Air Reserve Base, they have a very fortunate relationship in that they're now an ex officio member of your Planning and Zoning Board, as well as the county's comparable board. That truly facilitates the sharing of information and goes past sharing and goes into understanding and sharing knowledge. And it's for the long haul. So it helps very much on the integration side, which when you're dealing with encroachment issues, compatible land use issues, military operations, those are all dynamic, all subject to change, and having that kind of relationship is very important. And so that's ongoing here as well, and very much promoted by the ACU's process. The ACU's study itself primarily focuses on, I said 3 issues earlier, but it really focuses on 2. Tall structures, it makes a short reference to in the study. It really refers you back to the Federal Aviation Regulations, Part 77, which I know everyone knows. That has to do with how tall structures are regulated. But it mentions it in the ACU study, but not in any detail. Where the detail is are in these 2 areas, and it's depicted in terms of maps and then content provided to support that information. On the map side, you have 2 kinds of displays. The first is that's associated with accidents, and these are accident potential zones. There are 3 of them. One's called a clear zone. That starts at the end of the runway, goes out 3,000 feet, and it's 3,000 feet wide. The second one is an accident potential zone 1, and it starts at the end of the clear zone, goes out another 5,000 feet. Then you have an accident potential zone 2. Starts at the end of accident potential zone 1, goes out another 7,000 feet. The reason for that is the Air Force, as well as the other services, know by history and experience that if you have an accident, the chances of the accident occurring will be at least 70% in one of those 3 areas or on the runway itself. So very important from the safety standpoint. Therefore, it's laid out graphically in your ACU study. The next kinds of overlays you'll see in an ACU study are noise zones, and they are depicted as contours. Look like amoebas, maybe, if you appreciate the biology of encroachment. But they're in increments of 5 decibels, starting at 65, going up to 80. And of course, they're important because they represent a certain percentage of people who will become annoyed by noise levels at those different levels. So those 2 then are depicted on these maps. And then, of course, what I will now do is take those 2 elements and go one more level deeper with them and explain to you what it is those represent and why it's important to both the Air Force as well as to local communities. This particular slide represents the composite of those two elements in terms of their contours and their depictions in the ACU study. As you can see, the APZs, accident potential zones, are those rectangular shaped figures extending from both ends of the runway, and the noise zones are those irregular shaped features that you see flowing around the airfield itself, and that representing average noise levels. Now what I will do is I'll take you into the noise area first, because there are more considerations to each of these than just that depicted on the physical ground. When I speak about accident potential zones and the considerations that go into that, a second major element is not only the potential location of the accident, but the size of the accident. In this case, we are looking at what's referred to as debris fields. And as you can see by this slide, that for all accidents, roughly, I think that's 75% of all accidents have a debris field associated with it. What is a debris field? It is the scattering of aircraft parts and or fuel and or fire and or secondary objects that are blown out because of an explosion of some type in an accident. You can see that that debris field will range in size, the average being 5.1 acres, with the low end being high-performance aircraft, such as fighter aircraft being almost 3 acres in size, and larger aircraft being almost 8 acres in size. So when you think about that, over that area of anything from 3 to 8 acres, when there is an accident, and an accident is a catastrophic event, that the potential for harm, either to buildings or to people, is well established probably within that debris area. So very much a major consideration for the Air Force and the other services when it comes to accident potential zones. The third consideration, beyond the geography of the zones themselves and the debris field size, is the land use that may be occurring where the accident occurred. For all services, the clear zone, that area right at the end of the runway, by nature of the definition and name, clear zone, no service wants any activity to occur in that area. A number of reasons. Aircraft are at low altitude at that point. Secondly, the potential for an accident is greater at that point as well. So there's an absolute requirement on the part of the Department of Defense that all services control the land uses in that clear zone. Many have gone to the point of, I'll say in some cases, acquiring the land fee simple ownership, or obtaining easements which restrict the development on those lands, and or, of course, using land use regulations. All of those tools are used in the clear zone. As you can see in this slide, if I move out of the clear zone and I move to the accident potential zone 1, the Department of Defense recognizes that there is use that can be made of that land and economic viability in that land. But please note the nature of the kinds of recommended land uses which reflect the kinds of economic vitality for that area. They tend to be land uses that are very low in people. Obviously, that's very much a part of the safety concern that the Air Force has. You will notice that it also has that statement which I underlined that talks about low densities of people. And what that has to speak to is, in many cases, if I have open space, recreation, there's still that concern someone may have a large number of people in small spaces in a recreation environment. So they add that as an additional factor in the accident potential zone 1. In accident potential zone 2, you see an extension of that logic. Still the opportunity for economic development, the broadening of the land uses to include even home ownership, although on a very low density level, and going into commercial kinds of services. But again, I underline a section there that speaks to the desire to have a low intensity of use of people. Again, one of the major concerns about accident potential zones. Now, the Air Force recognizes that when you speak to land uses and you talk about commercial or light industrial, that in today's world, zoning isn't what it used to be, where a land use was fairly pure. Today, a lot of land uses are mixed use, and therefore tend to have uses that may in fact result in larger numbers than people than originally anticipated when these regulations were developed. So, the concern is, how do you maintain that low intensity of people? Well, the additional factor that the Air Force uses is a lot coverage size of 20%. That causes a constraining factor there. And then another constraining factor is one level versus two or more. Obviously, I can have something that has people in it that's one level, but I add 2 or 3 levels, and all of a sudden my density of people starts increasing. So, those are factors that the Air Force recommends strong consideration, again, for safety purposes in an ACU study. I just want to give you a couple examples of what an accident looks like. Here is, I would say to you, the best, if you're going to have an accident, you can't ask for a better accident. Not that we're asking for accidents, we're not. This happens to be a Harrier out in Yuma, Arizona, that was on final approach, had a mechanical failure, the pilot punched, and the aircraft crashed in the center of 4 backyards. There was minor damage to the one home in the upper left corner. One person suffered a small injury, and it was not from the accident. It was a young girl in that same home that when the plane crashed, it scared her. She ran out the front door in her bare feet, and she burned her feet on the concrete. So, if you're going to have an accident, that's the perfect time. But it's an example of a debris field that doesn't really exist. It is that point kind of accident that represents 25% of accidents that the Air Force speaks about. But again, even when there's not a debris field, had that moved 10, 15 feet one direction or another, there could have been fatalities. The next picture shows you an accident, in this case of a C-5. This is in Dover. And I don't know if you can see on the screens, but if you look at the lower right corner leading to the center of the picture, this brown space. And that brown space started off of the picture. This is where the C-5 came in and skidded for a fairly long length of distance, broke apart, created a debris field. Of course, no fire followed this accident. But again, if you're going to have a major aircraft accident, you can't pick a better place than in a field. And so here's a depiction of what that looks like. But you can see the parts of the aircraft spread over a fairly large area there. So again, trying to share with you what a debris field looks like and why the accident potential zones are important from a safety standpoint. In the ACU study itself, there is a rather lengthy and detailed chart on what is compatible and what isn't based on land uses. This chart just reflects a summary level of that kind of information. I think the point I would make with this slide is that you can see that those land uses that are low in people are generally speaking acceptable, and those that start bringing more people into the picture are those that are obviously not desired or least desired. So the area in terms of the APZs 1 and 2, low density is the underlying word in all considerations about accident potential zones. This is a slide from the 2007 ACU study that looks at the accident potential zones overlaid the current land use at that time. I think this aerial photo was based on 2006 information, if I remember right. So when they did the study, they saw 3 areas that at that point in the study they said may be incompatible. The one to the northeast is an industrial area, mining, and they rated that as potentially incompatible because mining can have a fair number of people in the area, can have a number of structures, and more importantly, it has explosives associated with it. So that's on the takeoff pattern, and one would not want to be taking off and landing and someone's detonated. To the southwest, you see two sites. One happens to be housing, and this is for agricultural workers. That is in, I think is labeled number 1. And then further south, near the racetrack, you see two small areas. That's commercial property that at that time was parking lots for the racetrack, but the people doing the study felt like that had potential because it was in fact zoned. You also will notice that I have an area circled, which is basically the Commerce Park area, that we're recognizing and identifying as may become incompatible based on the kinds of development. At the time of this study, it's green. And the reason is it was basically open space. There was no activity on the ground other than a few activities at that time. So this is what's in the current ECU study now. Now I'm going to move from the safety aspects of an ECU study to the noise aspects. Noise is a major issue. Maybe not so much here in the Homestead area, but I can assure you in other areas, this is as important as the safety aspects. So when we look at noise, what this study does is it first looks at the level of operations at the air base itself. And they're looking for a fair amount of information to include what kind of flight tracks are you on, what altitudes are you at, what power settings are the aircraft at, what kinds of engines, because different aircraft are different models and therefore have different engines and their noise signatures are different. And you can imagine a small twin-engine prop has one kind of noise versus a jet F-16 having another kind, especially if it's got afterburners in and what have you. So they have to take into consideration the kinds of aircraft and the number of operations. Now that's in flight. They're also concerned about aircraft operations on the ground. And what do I mean by on the ground? That is, where are they doing maintenance and how are they doing the maintenance? I don't know how many of you have had the pleasure of being near an Air Force base or a Navy base where that engine is running and you're waiting for it, or even a commercial airport where that engine is running and you just know it's going to take off, and it doesn't. And that's irritating. So that's another factor that's considered in the ECU studies from a noise standpoint. The next thing you do is you take that information and you put it into a computer program. And that program takes this information and generates those noise contours that you saw in the earlier map, and gives and produces those contours at that 65, 70, 75, and 80 decibel level, LDN. And in this case, LDN is a recognized national standard. It was in fact developed in cooperation between the Federal Aviation Administration, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, HUD, and the Department of Defense, and probably a few other agencies. And so that is the recognized metric. It's a well-respected metric and a well-proven metric that measures annoyance. A lot of this was done based on surveys. Surveys over the last 30 years, both in Western Europe, in the United States, Australia, New Zealand. And all these studies that have been done, the data was taken and looked at and compiled and created a curve called the Schultz curve. And out of that comes the algorithms that go into the computer program. That's probably more than you want to know. But what I'm trying to stress here is it's a well-respected analytical tool for measuring average noise levels. It also applies a penalty for any kinds of operations that occur at night. And night's defined after 10 p.m. in the morning and before 7 a.m. in the morning, when we're sleeping and trying to rest. So they actually add a penalty for that period of time. And that produces these noise contours that you saw earlier. Again, as with the case of the accident potential zones, there is a much more detailed chart in the ACU study that speaks to noise and compatibility as it relates to land use. This, again, is a summary level. Again, I think I can show that the interest and area of most interest is that that's associated with people, particularly in this case in residential land use settings, single-family, multifamily. And generally speaking, that is what's not compatible. However, through engineering, that can be improved. That is, I can build a home or a house, and I can build into it insulation and double pane or triple pane windows, and I can significantly reduce the outside noise level such that the inside noise level is acceptable and practical for living, sleeping, socializing. However, if I want to have a picnic outside, building my home tight doesn't necessarily help me. So, in this case, engineering controls do work as it relates to noise, but again, only on the inside. This slide depicts what is in the ACU study as it relates to noise and what may or may not be compatible in the Homestead area. In this case, you only see one yellow area, and again, that happens to be the agricultural housing just to the southwest of the airfield. All of this information that I have shared with you goes into creating the study, and the purpose of the study is to come up with practical and hopefully implementable recommendations. This ACU study identifies 10 recommendations. They're listed here. I won't go to them in any detail other than to say that most of them are within the power of local communities, especially in Florida. That's not true in all states, by the way. There's still many areas in the United States where they don't have zoning and land use controls, and therefore it becomes much more of a challenge on how do you deal with these kind of issues in those circumstances. But you have all that here in the state. And to that extent, it's a question of saying, can I do this? Will I do this? How might I do this? And one of the ways of doing that, of course, is to work collaboratively, which you have done, and that's done, generally speaking, in the joint land use study process. At this point, this ends my formal presentation. I'll entertain any questions or comments that you may have. And at the end of those questions or comments, I believe Ms. Drake will follow me and then speak to the details of the joint land use study. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your portion. It's very, very informative. I think we'll go ahead and open the floor for questions for you right now, and then we'll go ahead and have the city's, the J. Luce, well, not the city's presentation, the J. Luce, one who actually was part of that. So let's go ahead and open the floor for comments or questions from council. Any comments or questions from anybody in council?
Mayor Bell, that was a very thorough presentation, and at this time I don't have any questions yet. I mean, I'm sure as we continue I may have questions later, but not right now.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and have the presentation from the consultant. This has been very informative, I have to tell you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's been a long time. During the BRAC process, we had presentations, and I attended the BRAC hearings. So this BRAC informative hearings, like we had them in Coral Gables, at the Biltmore, and a few other spots. So this is very, very informative. Thank you. Okay. Stay tuned. Well, I'm sure we'll have more questions.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Thank you, Mr. Huber. That was excellent background, and very good that you had that first, because that is the technical basis for the joint land use study, which of course is focused a bit more on the community side, particularly in identifying those strategies to reduce the risk of encroachment and to highlight the very best practices that are available to defense communities around the country to address these issues. I first want to just put the Joint Land Use Study, or JLUS, I will use that acronym, into context. It is now a familiar refrain to you that it is a collaborative process. It's intended to engage multiple stakeholders, the local communities, private property owners, the military, of course, and even conservation interests. And its intent is to balance a series of stakeholder interests. It is first and foremost always about protecting the military mission. There's nothing more critical as an outcome to the JLUS than ensuring that the military mission remains viable. But it's also essential, since it is a collaborative, cooperative process, to accommodate local economic development and growth, to protect private property rights, because all of these strategies have to be implemented within what we all know is the arena of legally established private property rights. And also we look to other complementary goals, such as protecting environmentally sensitive lands that are around the military installation, which it's one of the strategies that we've identified here for Homestead. So all of these many interests converge to inform the strategies and recommendations that we identified as part of the JLUS process. I'll go ahead and give you a relatively brisk overview of that. We have about a dozen recommendations. They are consistent and in fact very similar to many of the actions that were part of the ACU's study. And we can, of course, entertain questions. As always with the JLUS, it is as well, I want to note, an advisory document. That does not mean that we don't want to emphasize implementation. We absolutely want you to adopt as many of these strategies and practices as you can, because it's critical to protect the military base. But we also have to find feasible strategies, and that's part of this critical beginning of the dialogue in focusing on the implementation part. So we hope that we'll get beyond merely a list of best practices to become feasible, workable solutions that will be part of the everyday planning and decision-making within the city of Homestead and within the county as well. You've already seen the spatial, the geographic areas around the Air Force Base that are affected by noise and by air safety. They really, again, form the basis for all of the recommendations that you see. The purpose of the JLUS is to specifically tie strategies to given areas around Homestead Air Reserve Base. In general, we have identified that as the military zone. As Mr. Huber has already pointed out, we reference only the 2004 JLUS, not the 2007. I believe the accident potential zones are very much the same, because that's based on the runway and on flight activity, and there's a slight change in the noise zone. So these geographic areas are still very relevant in terms of the recommendations that we'll identify. So the military zone that we're referring to, which can be the basis for an overlay zoning district, includes those areas that are affected by noise and, of course, by the air safety. And the JLUS also looks, as does the ACUS, at a few of the other types of impacts due to proximate growth that can affect aviation activity. That does include tall structures, that includes uses that might attract birds, as an example, and create a risk of bird airstrike hazards. There can also be interference due to excessive lighting if it is not properly shielded, or even interference with the electromagnetic spectrum. So there are a whole variety of impacts that we do have to consider in addition to noise and air safety. But primarily we'll be focusing on those APZs and on the noise contours that we've identified. Again, this was just a slide with the study purpose emphasizing the collaborative nature, the necessity of balancing diverse and multiple interests. And again, this is an advisory document, but we hope to begin the dialogue to implement many of these critical practices. The military zone, again, includes the accident potential zones and the high noise zones. This can be the basis for land use and zoning strategies. We'll talk about that in detail in a few moments on some subsequent slides. This certainly will look familiar to you. These are the accident potential zones, and the noise contours, again, is derived from the 2004, not the current 2007 study, but very similar. So you can see those areas that are affected off of the base. The JLUS is very much oriented not to the technical modeling, but to the other side of the fence, so to speak, thinking about the strategies that local communities and also developers and private property owners can engage in to promote more compatible growth and reduce the risk of land use conflict. I'll dive right into the dozen or so strategies. They vary. We are certainly familiar with the most traditional, which are the regulatory strategies. Those, if you will, are more of the stick. Your zoning, your development regulations, subdivision regulations, those documents, those legal tools that require that development be compatible next to a military installation. But we do have a series of other strategies as well that I'll begin with. They are more communication-oriented. The JLIS is as much about educating local communities and private property owners about the impact of developing proximate to a military installation as it is about possibly restricting growth. One of the most basic strategies would be to establish a website. This could be linked to the property appraiser's database in the county. That would allow an individual private property owner to determine if he or she owns a piece of land that may fall within, for example, one of the noise contours or accident potential zones, and what the associated development limitations might be as a result of that. So it's certainly a very effective tool for sharing information with citizens who live and work and own property around the military installation. I have a very quick example of this from Escambia County, which is dealing with significant growth pressures around the Pensacola Naval Air Station, and I would cite, are actually a very good model for many of the strategies that I'll be describing this evening as well. But they have an excellent GIS website. It's interactive. It allows a property owner to go right onto the website, pick a layer, and they can see if a particular lot or tract falls within a high noise zone or an accident potential zone. Some of the other strategies as well include conservation. The Department of Defense has authorized all of the branches of the military, including the Air Force, to form a partnership with nonprofit groups. It may be something like the Nature Conservancy or the Trust for Public Land. And this would be to buy development rights on land that is adjacent to military installations. The development rights would only be purchased from those owners who are willing to sell. The intent is to prevent encroachment and also to protect sensitive environmental resources in land, so it achieves a complementary purpose. This is one of the most effective strategies anywhere around the country, and it is well funded as well, which is very important to preventing encroachment. It is, I've heard, currently the most funded of any of the tools within the federal inventory for acquiring development rights and protecting environmentally sensitive lands. So it certainly is an excellent strategy to consider. Transfer of development rights, or TDR, as you will see it abbreviated here, the purpose is to shift growth away from areas around military installations to lands that don't have the impacts associated with the high noise or the accident potential. So it's shifting growth away from areas that are constrained to those areas that are more suitable for development. This is really already enabled within the state of Florida. It can be actively practiced as well. It's especially effective in those areas where there is high growth because there would be significant demand. And it requires that developers would be willing to go into the private market to purchase credits to build, for example, more housing units on areas that are unconstrained. But it can be an effective approach and a strategy, perhaps in the long term. It certainly requires zoning. It requires comprehensive plan designations for areas that are both sending and receiving areas, and it can be a somewhat complex administrative program. It sounds a little daunting, but it certainly is an effective program, and we would view that as a feasible longer-term strategy for accommodating the development pressure and the growth which is coming to Homestead, but guiding it through the forces of the private market to those areas that are less constrained by the noise and accident potential. If there is any state in the country, and I've done JLISs in about 6 or 7 states, any state that protects its military bases and has a very firm guidelines about planning, it certainly is Florida. This is truly an innovator in the protection of lands around military installations. There are specific guidelines and statutes related to the Growth Planning Act here in the state of Florida that require that comprehensive plan language specifically address issues of compatibility around military installations. And so it is, of course, one of the strategies of the JLIS to revise the existing comprehensive plans of the city and of the county as well, to recognize the ACUs, the JLIS, and the compatibility issues around Homestead Air Reserve Base, and to begin to identify some of these strategies, if not in detail, at least to recognize those issues, and to begin to lay the groundwork for implementing those tools. Disclosure is another of the communication-oriented strategies. It is very critical, increasingly adopted by defense communities around the country. What this does is it requires that if someone were to look at a house or an apartment within a designated area, likely within one of the high noise zone or accident potential zones around Homestead, that individual will be given a form notifying him or her that the piece of property at which they're looking is next to a military installation and is therefore subject to certain impacts. Maybe, again, high noise, the risk of accident potential as an example. The purpose being to get that information out so that people can make an intelligent choice about their real estate investments. This does also require an ordinance. It requires collaboration with the real estate community as well. So this is a strategy that touches multiple stakeholders, but it is one of the most effective means for making people aware of the implications of renting or buying a piece of property that is close to a military installation. We think it may be obvious that if you're next to an airbase, you will hear airplanes, you'll hear the impacts of aviation activity. But it is nonetheless important to get that information out when people are making such a critical decision. An navigation easement is really, in many ways, a much more aggressive form of a disclosure. It is also increasingly adopted by communities. It's used in the following way. If a developer is interested, say, in subdividing a piece of land for residential purposes in proximity to an airbase, as an example, the city or county might require that that developer dedicate an navigation easement. So the individual would recognize that the residential subdivision, as an example, is next to a military installation subject to these impacts, and that easement would be recorded on the plat, recorded on the property, so that the developer and then all of the subsequent homeowners as well would be, again, informed of the effects of living in proximity to a military installation. It also provides legal protection to the local community, too, if there are subsequent complaints as a result of having housing units that are adjacent to military activity. Outdoor lighting, if it is unshielded, if it is excessive, this may interfere with aviator vision. So what we would suggest here are just some very carefully targeted guidelines for exterior lighting. This is not intended for the typical individual homeowner, but really for the bigger offenders, so to speak, of light and glare within the landscape. This may be large commercial or industrial uses, billboards, major roads. We are not in any way suggesting that light be prohibited in areas around the airbase, but just that when new lighting is put into place, that the developer and the owner use fully shielded cutoff lighting. It's not necessarily more expensive. In many ways, it is much more energy efficient because it illuminates only the area intended to be lit. And from above, it looks like a totally dark sky. You prevent the glare from going up into the night sky and interfering with aviator vision. So it's really quite essential for the Air Force and for other branches that certainly rely on the use of night goggles. Noise attenuation, I think Mr. Hubert already had referred to this. This is the use of specific construction practices. And again, what I want to clarify here, this is not about retrofitting. We're not suggesting that existing uses have to be removed or in some way redesigned to comply with these standards. The JLIS is most effective in looking forward to how we might have more compatible new growth. So the suggestion with this particular strategy would be to use the types of design practices and construction practices for housing in those areas that are exposed to higher noise, therefore limiting the amount of noise that penetrates the house and can then affect quality of life for the individuals within those housing units. So again, it's, as with all the recommendations, targeted to a specific area, in this case those higher noise zones that might have about 60 or 65 decibels plus exposure on an average basis. And of course the big one. The others are all, I always refer to them as sort of the puppies and the kittens of the strategies. Everyone seems to like them. They're not terribly onerous, but this really, those are more of the carrots, so to speak. This is really where the rubber meets the road. These are the strategies that limit the amount of density and possibly the type of land use that can exist in proximity to a military installation. The JLIS is not specific about the types of densities and intensities that are appropriate. It does certainly reference the Department of Defense and Air Force handbook guidance. That is what we use as the basis for our recommendations. one of the essential challenges of the JLS during more of the implementation phase is to bring some clarity. In many cases, compatibility can be a relatively vague, somewhat nebulous term, but it's critical in implementation that the local decision makers, the local planners, all of the stakeholders be part of a collaborative process to determine and really to define specifically what compatibility might be. We certainly do understand the importance of limiting those uses that are noise sensitive, whether they're homes, schools, churches, offices, and also secondly those places that tend to concentrate people. The intent again being to limit the number of people who are exposed to the nuisance of noise and perhaps even more seriously to the risk of an aircraft accident. So it's really again about finding the right specific formulas, the right metrics for limiting intensity and finding compatibility. There are a variety of ways to do that. You can consider lot coverage, the size of a building, the number of people and workers who might be on a site on a per acre basis as an example, and also height. So there are a variety of quantifiable metrics that we can use and can discuss tonight to begin to define what compatibility means. But the JLS certainly does reference the DoD guidelines and encourages compliance with that as part of the study. Along with all of the conditions that I referred to earlier, the noise attenuation, the lighting, the possible restrictions on types of uses or intensity, all of those could be combined within an overall overlay district that would include the high noise exposure areas and also the accident potential zones that we've already heard described as part of the ACU's study. So that is the regulatory vehicle, the zoning mechanism that the city would use to begin to overlay these conditions to encourage compatible development while still allowing for reasonable economic use of properties that are in proximity to the base. I think we've already talked a little bit about the vertical structures. The JLS does address that issue. So it is, of course, critical to avoid cell towers or very tall buildings that can some way interfere with navigable airspace. We've talked about bird airstrike hazards. The strategy here is simply to limit those types of uses, whether it is a large body of water or a landfill, which is actually not terribly far away, about 5 miles away from the Air Force Base, that can attract a significant bird population, and that does pose some risk for aircraft as well. So the intent here would simply be to limit the size, maybe 1 or 2 surface acres, for example, of waters of bodies of water that might attract fowl. And I believe that's it for the recommendations. So that's kind of a quick overview of what we identified as part of the JLS. You can see how it does complement the ACUs. It's a little bit less technically oriented, more focused on the community planning part and what the local stakeholders can do to accommodate growth safely around the Air Force Base. And I think at this point we'll go ahead and open it up for questions from all of you or from members of the public.
Thank you so much. Any comments or questions from any of the members of council?
Mayor Bell, I have a comment.
Ms. Lobos?
And I wanted to make this comment after the 2 presenters went. I don't have any questions regarding the presentation. Actually, the JLU's presentation was done early on in our term, when November or December, and so this was something that I was familiar with. But I just wanted to say again, welcome. Are you tired of hearing us say welcome, welcome, welcome to Homestead? And I just wanted to give a little bit of overview as to where my position is on this. During the campaign when I was a candidate, I was asked at the Chamber of Commerce luncheon if I was in support of the JLUs. We were all asked that actually, and I said yes. I did my homework, I researched what it actually was and what it meant not only to this community but to the Air Force Base, and I said absolutely, I'm for it. I was then elected. And as a councilwoman, I continue to feel the same way. At that luncheon, I wasn't just doing lip service because it was a Chamber of Commerce. It truly is how I feel about the Air Force Base, Air Reserve Base, for both personal reasons and as well as what my family represents. On a personal level, and I've said this in public meetings before, that my mom has pulled home mobility. She is with APHIS, and is right now at the Homestead Air Force Base. She left for a year. She volunteered to go to Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan, and she did spend a year there. She came back, and now she plans to finish out her career. She's served AFIS now for 27 years, and she's been all over the world, but she decided to come back to Homestead and make this her home, and that's how we all wound up in Homestead, as a matter of fact. From her family, we have 4 men who are retired, all high-ranking officers in the Army and in the Navy. So that military appreciation, not only what you guys do for our country, but also what it means in my family, is very much where my strong support of the Air Force Base is. I was, as a candidate, supportive of it. As a councilwoman, I continue to be that. Lengthy documents, but I have studied quite a bit because I do want to understand the ACUs and I do want to understand the JLUs. We will be voting and making decisions here that affect the Air Reserve Base. My goal is to see it grow. I'm so happy when I see more aircraft on the weekends. I see a lot of training that come through the BX Smart and all this activity, increased activity. I actually was on the base for a tour and was just so amazed as to how many different missions you have going on at that base. Very happy to see that. So from my point of view, I think that the best thing about being local government is that you don't have these layers of people to go through for communication. What you can do is you come to us or we go to you. We run into each other all the time at luncheons and whatnot, and so the communication's there. If there's ever anything that you feel might be a problem, I think that you can just approach at least myself or any one of us and just let us know if there's something that you have concern over. Now, one more thing I want to say, and I don't want to drag this on too long, is that Mayor, when she was a Councilwoman Bell, was very active in the Military Affairs Committee. And one of the first things she did when we were candidates is you have to be involved with the MAC. And so I learned about the MAC through her, started attending the MAC lunches as a candidate. As a matter of fact, the MAC chair said, well, I hope you continue. If you're elected, I hope to continue to see you here. You remember that, Councilwoman Sierra? She said that, and I said, yes, ma'am. So I was elected, and the first thing I did to our assistant, who's not here tonight, I said, you make sure that those MAC luncheons get on my calendar, because we are so overwhelmed with all these different events. I said, but that needs to be on my calendar so that I can make it as many times as possible. And I've continued to attend the MAC luncheon. I actually appreciate what the MAC does in our community and how supportive they are of the Homestead Air Reserve Base. So I will continue to attend the MAC luncheons. Any events that you have out there, I will continue to support it, be a part of it. And I just look forward for this next whatever number of years that you're there to continue to work with you. And I do appreciate all the information that was given today. If I have any further questions, I'm sure I'll bring them to someone and I'll get the answers that I need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Lobos. Now let me preclude some of the comments. I didn't say you have to. I would just encourage them to. In my gentle way, I just encourage them to be supportive of the military. Thank you. And what Councilwoman Lobos didn't say was that as long as the base is strong and active and up and running, her mom has a job. So this is a really, really good thing. Well, thank you so much. I would love to get some feedback and comments and questions. And I know Colonel McCauley and I have had a couple of very, very good conversations, and so I look forward to more of those. And one of the things I would really encourage is in a city such as Homestead, there often are little rumors that fly around, and someone says, oh, the mayor said I could do this, or Colonel said I could do this, and that's generally not the case. So we know we're going to be discussing with each other and having good interaction. And if someone says, oh, I'm going to build right here, and usually I know nothing about it, and they go to the military, and somehow these things get filtered back. So just let's definitely keep the lines of communication open. As I looked at the joint land use study, as well as I take a look at the air insulation compatible use zones, as well as accident potential zones, what we pretty much are dealing with in the city of Homestead is APZ 2. There's a particular area of APZ 2. And 99% of the city is outside of accident potential zone. It's just a small part within the Park of Commerce. And so we do realize that we will be working together on a lot of these POC, Park of Commerce issues, and nothing that I don't think can be worked out. And what I discovered was that some of the issues were quite frankly, when we sold the Park of Commerce, the last remaining 100 acres that the city held, when we sold it, and we sold it under the 2004 guidelines that we had all been following, as well as accident potential zone and the guidelines for at the time. So we went way beyond those guidelines. We capped the density, we capped the height structure, and we went even beyond those guidelines. And one of the things that I've realized is that as we sold this land, and we're under the 0405, and Mr. Shahada, correct me at any time if I'm misspeaking, but I've read a lot of it, studied a lot of it, attended a lot of meetings, but we had agreed to cap, and the developers that purchased the Park of Commerce had agreed to cap at 0.4, 40% of the land use coverage of the acre. So in other words, if they were to buy 1 acre, they can only build on 40% of that acre. And as we look at the 2007 guidelines, we see it's capped at 0.20, so 20% of the acreage. So there's things that we are going to work on together, because we're realizing that we sold this land under one set of guidelines, and we're bound legally by those guidelines as we sold that property. We realize that there are some differences here, so we are going to have to work. And one of the first things I always do when a developer comes and sits down with me and the developer's representative, I send them to you guys. That's the first thing I do, and I'm sure they'll all tell you that. I see Ms. Batiste back there nodding her head, because that's the very first thing I told Ms. Batiste and her clients were to go to the Air Force Base, because very often, if it gets worked out on that end, it just makes our life a lot easier on this end. So there is a bit of self-interest here as well. Mr. Shahada has a comment, and then I think we have a gentleman who wants to speak, and Mr. McCulley. Colonel McCulley, I'm sorry.
Just to say a few things. If my memory serves me correct, Colonel McCulley, when we met with you, I think you had practically meetings with Ms. Batiste there, developers, people who bought the 100 acres, and also you met with the people who bought the first portion of the Park Commerce. The ones who bought the first portion, you had no problem with the development, everything was fine. With the clients, Ms. Batiste represents, I think you had a comment about one location. That's around the lake where they have two-story building. And I hope this is something can be worked out where, of course I'm putting Leila on the spot right now, but this is, oh good, I should have spoken after you.
Go ahead.
And you also
Would you please state your name?
Absolutely. Richard Perez with offices at 701 Brickell Avenue, and I work with Ms. Batiste. And you saw some of my thunder, Mayor Bell. Thank you. But we wanted to thank you because from the very beginning, and just to reiterate what you said, you told us sit down with the Air Force Base, make sure that you guys work together, make sure that you work in a collaborative process. We took that advice from the very, very beginning. We met before we closed the property. We met with Colonel Daly, who was here a little while ago. There he is. With Colonel Daly. In February, we met with the Marchdale Day folks, with Mr. Hubert, Mr. Carrington. We met with Colonel McCulley, all in an effort to try to come up with a creative way of balancing both the obvious needs of the Homestead Air Force Base and the obvious needs of the Homestead Park of Commerce. Both are, we believe, important economic engines as the city moves forward, and for us to be at odds makes absolutely no sense. To that end, we understood, and they understood, that there are certain entitlements that the Park of Commerce has. So there's a development of regional impact that vests it for a certain amount of development. But what we wanted to discuss was, and here's an email that sort of recaps our conversation, which I'll pass around. We were in the midst of discussing sort of creative ways where we can sort of succeed and they can succeed. And one of the things that we discussed was this issue of how to limit the population of people that come into the Park of Commerce. And we talked about different proxies, different ideas in terms of how we can manage that. For example, one of the concerns that Colonel Daly had expressed and others, that they don't want more than 50 people per acre at the site. And we've discussed sort of limiting the amount of parking on that site at 5,000 parking spaces, so that we would have sort of and that has a nice translation into your zoning code in terms of how many people can go on there. So that's part of the discussion. We haven't finalized those discussions. We look forward to finalizing those discussions. We look forward to balancing the needs of both the Air Force Base and the economic development needs and the economic impact that certainly a developed Park of Commerce would have with this community. And again, I wanted to thank you and others who urged us from the very beginning to discuss with the Air Force Base and to sit down and really sort of begin that dialogue. And we look forward to sort of a fruitful end to that process that balances both of our needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, to answer your question in the sense of some of the issues that we're going on, yes, we've seen a number of the developers come and talk to us, and we appreciate you saying them to us, because that allows us, again, as he's noted, to sit down and talk. And that's very important, particularly with the issues with the long-term development of those properties and what goes into those. And of course, as mentioned in the initial briefings, the light industrial, low-density, low-intensity issues what light industrial brings to the table. We're looking at things. If a plane, heaven forbid, goes down, it's better it lands on things than people. I mean, to put it succinctly. And our concerns that we have as each of these properties develop, of course, are things that are going to collect people in a specific area. So density is critical to this process. An office building, for example, and again, we've worked with you, and there's still things being developed. We don't know, and you don't know the last time we talked, what's really going to go in there. Most of it, light industrial, small single-story warehouses were what was presented, and that is very much compatible with what we're looking for. The issues of multi-story office complex possibilities, things that were discussed, are some that we were going to talk about at a later date, and we continue to do that because we want to work with you on those. But those are our concerns because of the density issues that go with that. I want to make sure that we look at this at a certain perspective. The perspective, I'm a native Californian. Okay, I'm not from Florida. And it's been a long day today. But you have to pat yourself on the back, as City Homestead, the county, and others. You're blessed, and I said that earlier, about the density and the issues that you have around the base and how you have used your foresight, both the prior administrations and definitely the current one, both here at the city and the county, of looking at the base and see what we need to do to protect it and keep it as a viable entity in the community. In California, we've seen, growing up there, we saw many bases close, many due to the encroachment issues that we face today, and the world is getting smaller. California lost many, if you look at the history there, lost many viable bases, name a few. George Air Force Base, due to encroachment. Mather, McClellan, Alameda Naval Air Station, which was a huge one in the San Francisco area. Great Mare Island, which dealt with subs and other Navy facilities, and the list goes on. The whole impact to the economy in California was huge. And you have to pat yourself on the back here locally, because an outsider coming in, a new person to Homestead, looks at what you've accomplished, and there's a lot of good there in the sense of what has happened. And we want to continue that in partnership with that. It's important that we continue to carry that bucket of water that was started many years ago. And the thing we're getting smarter on this. That's what's happening right now. That's why you're seeing the changes in the 0.20, 4.0. I mean, a few years ago, 0.40, and the issues that go with that, we knew what we knew then. It's progress, not perfection, as an old saying goes, okay? And so when we say 0.20, we're looking at the hard statistics based upon national averages of accidents and even worldwide of what happens with military aircraft. And that's what we have a responsibility to do that. So the base is going to be very much engaged with the local community, with our developers, and our partners with this, both with the MAC Council and other entities, to get that message out, because our #1 issue has to be, because we're mandated, is public safety. Yes, we're concerned about the BRAC, and that is an issue, but public safety is where it's at, okay? And I know everyone here is too. That is not an issue. And take that perspective, step back for a minute, and look at what you've accomplished, and it's a lot. We have things here in the Florida interest that are unlike anywhere in the nation, and you're very lucky that Florida County, Miami-Dade, and the city have seen from that point to the present to do those kind of things. So you need to really pat yourself on the back compared to a lot of other places. There are places that, for example, and I have to, correct me if I'm wrong on this, some of my guys here will do this, up in Virginia, Oceana, anybody hear of that Naval Air Station up there? Here's a perfect example. They are buying land up there at a tune of somewhere around $15 million a year. The city's coughing us up to buy property and destroy the property, level it. So the issues that go with that, because frankly, sometimes we all get busy with lives, and we worry about what happens inside the gate versus so much outside the gate. But the military's getting smarter, and we want to share our concerns and do the right things, just like you want to do. So again, your comments, Ms. Lobos, is perfect. We're right with you, and we want to help with those processes. So the partnership issues, we would love to come to any meeting that you want to come talk about issues. If you get a little confused, like you said, get on the phone and we'll talk. Our developer partnerships are important, again, as we go through this process. And this is the implementation part. We're right now in history at a point where we need to start the implementation processes that go in the two studies. And this is what's so critical. Unlike those other places I mentioned, they kind of sleep at the switch a little bit, I'm talking about there, and they woke up one day and found out, wow, where did all those houses come from? And the other issues that go with that. And we're poised to do that. I think the Park of Commerce, both the benefit it has done for the city and the other things down at the south end of the APZ2 are things that we can partner with, again, to do it smart as we go through this process. We know that each of those recommendations are going to have to be looked at hard. We're going to have to look at the negotiations of those and see what makes sense both on, of course, the military side, the city, and so forth, okay? We realize that. But we want to partner and we want to help. So those are the issues that we have. Okay?
Thank you.
Any comment or questions so far on anything I've said?
This is a public hearing. The public is welcome to come forth at this time if they would like to speak.
Monica Whitaker, 3320 Northeast 13th Circle Drive, Unit 108. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, and all here present. I'm very happy as a homeowner resident to see the relationship of our air base and our City Council committee here. That is a beautiful relationship. We are glad, like the Mayor has stated before, we're very glad to have you guys here. But a lot of the questions, a lot of homeowners comes to me as a representative of my community is that what is, and if this question was answered before, please forgive me, I wasn't here at that time. But if you could, once again, repeat for me, what would be your plan of emergency in the event of your regular exercise activities? For example, between your F-16s, what is the plan of emergency in the event that it would fall on top of one of our homes?
Gotta use the mic. We have a specific office that's dedicated toward emergency management on the base. That includes anything from hurricanes to these kind of accidents. I have been at a couple of accidents, aircraft accidents myself as an on-scene commander. And our issue is, of course, we try to respond as quickly as possible. Of course, we track our aircraft. We want to know where they're at. And if a pilot has an emergency, of course, we try to do as much as we can to notify the public as early as possible to let them know what's going on. Both, officials, whoever we need to know, the FAA, all those kind of things. Now, heaven forbid a plane goes down. And no one wants that. But if one, of course, happens, of course, we will respond to the scene, both with our partners with the city and the county, and be on the spot as soon as we can to help anyone there that we can. That's important because the public safety and the public assistance is what we want to do, and we have a great history, I think, of providing local support to our community. If a plane goes down, of course, we cordon off the area. We make sure it's kept safe. And because we are flying fighter aircraft, there are a lot of things on there. And we keep the public away. We work with our partners in the police and the fire, make the area safe as best as possible, cordon it off, and protect the public. And then all the other issues that come into play after that in the sense of public support and resolving any issues that the public has as we go through that process. Okay, so it is well thought out. We practice that at the base. We have people dedicated to that, and I think that the city and the county will find that the air base is there to respond. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, okay, got it.
And I would like to also add that the homes that she's referencing are outside of the ACUs. There's no, outside in the APZ, there's no homes within the APZ.
Right, and you're kind of off the side of the base, so you're fine. Okay.
Well, I wanted to reassure her of that, because sometimes people just automatically are assuming that they're in some type of accident potential zone. But no, it's a great question.
Yeah, and we of course, we're all family. We all live in the community, and you're important, okay? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from council? No more further questions from the public? I think all the questions have been answered by the wonderful presentation that we've had. So I really do greatly appreciate all the participation. We so much do appreciate you being here with us this evening. Colonel McCauley, feel free.
There's no other closing comments I've got. Said a lot at the beginning, but I carry notes, so I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. You know how these yellow notes get. Our next step is the implementation, okay? And we have an individual on the zoning committee with the city and those kind of things. We'd like to, again, request, if it's possible, a meeting with who you think is appropriate to sit down and look at the implementation process and start the ball rolling, so to speak. We're available anytime you're available, as I say. And so what we'll do is, with your permission, is contact your office or whoever appropriate office, city manager's office, I think probably would be a good start too, to get this ball rolling and bring those together. Now, we'd like to invite Ms. Drake, if she's available, and of course our consultant is out of town, but I think Larry and I can get a lot of those issues moved along to help. This is going to be a long process, and we appreciate your assistance on that. So that was my last comment.
And we'd be delighted to sit down with you and work on implementation. I'd be happy to sit down with Colonel Binger, Colonel McCauley, Mr. Ventura, as well as any of the consultants. We would be more than delighted to do so and to move this forward for implementation. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all I have. Any other questions?
Mr. Manager?
There's one back over here. Do you have a question?
Oh, sir, if you have a question or comment, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Tan Johnson, and I wasn't sure if I was allowed to ask a question, so I didn't. But my address is 10900 Southwest 176. Yeah, you have my card. I just had a quick question for you guys and maybe the city. You may have already answered this. I didn't hear it during the discussion, but I remember some years back they scaled the base down, and I kind of wanted to know if they had any plans in the future of increasing the size of the base or some of the, maybe I'm not using the right terminology, some of the
Well, Mr. Johnson, I'm sure Colonel McCauley can answer that, but I have sat here for 4.5 years, and I have been to ribbon cuttings on the base as they have enlarged, as they've added a small type of a conference room. Just MSST Miami, we've been there for SOC South, on and on and on. It's just been very exciting. So there is a continued and an ongoing expansion of this base and of this wonderful structure. But I'm sure Colonel McCauley has a lot more information than I could possibly give you.
I start, I just did a little review of what's been going on at Homestead, just, as a new person, looking at what the base has done in the past. I'll give you an example. Over the last 10 years since Andrew, and we seem to use Andrew as a benchmark around here, it's like life before and life after, okay?
That's true.
And since Andrew, the U.S. government, or our taxpayers, have put in over $145 million into the base in the sense of infrastructure support, buildings, you name it. The base is, they've put in the things necessary to get the missions going. Last year alone, the Air Force Reserve Command placed $24 million in various projects to include such things as new lodging for the base, infrastructure upgrades, renovations of buildings, and the list goes on. Just last year alone, in FY 2007. We're poised to do a number of projects which we've requested, such as a new troop feeding facility. This is a facility, we have a current facility that's pre-Andrew, and we're trying to get that upgraded right now. We're also looking at doing a new gate project which will help bring commercial vehicles in, inspect them, and do a number of other things. We're doing land work on the environment, certain project with those. We're also doing a new family camp that we're building here within the next year and a half. That's a fam camp, we call it in the military, where you can bring, if you're authorized, you can bring your vehicle in during those snowbird times and come in and do that. So the list goes on. So the future for the base is good, and the command and the Air Force has been pumping a lot of money into taxpayers to keep that, because once again, this is a national asset for our country. So the military recognizes that. In fact, the mayor mentioned different tenants, we call them, SOC South. There's the ICE, the Immigration, Customs, and those folks are on the base, and they're expanding. And there's plans for different growth opportunities on the base, and we have the land. So if the folks, if DOD agencies want to come and they bring the MILCON to military construction dollars to do it, well, we'll talk. Okay, and that's how it works. So it's a great base in the sense of growth, and I'll tell you, it is a busy base. It's almost on steroids, if you want to call it, because it's always doing something. And the involvement with the community has been great. The MAC councils that we have been great in helping bring things in, whispering in ears and doing the right things to help the base. So I think we've got a good future with everyone. Okay? Does that answer your question? Okay.
Colonel McCauley, I have one more question for you. When we spoke, you had asked me a question, and I'm definitely prepared to go forth right now. You had asked us if we would adopt the J-Luce rather than just accept the J-Luce. That was your terminology?
Yeah, adoption.
I mean, we would be. I understand, and I think if that gives the air base more comfort, relative comfort, I'm more than happy to move that forward tonight. This is a special call. We can certainly take any action right now.
Well, there's different recommendations of both the J-Luce and the ACUS study.
Okay.
And what I meant by adoption of those recommendations, now each of those recommendations have to fit both with the partnership we're talking about, and look at the wording and look at how that fits locally, because these recommendations are such that we offer those up as the guidance, and I think they should be adopted, because once they're done and adopted, then the implementation process starts. And that's where the committees and everybody else get down to the nuts and bolts, like I mentioned earlier. So yes.
So you're including the 07 guidelines in that adoption?
Yes.
Okay. We probably should sit down and have that implementation meeting.
Yeah, and that kind of round discussion needs to be done.
Sure.
Because, again, like I mentioned earlier, we've gotten a lot smarter as time has gone on. I mean, what you knew then versus what we know now. And that's the part that we need to make sure we look at well. But we're looking for the adoption, because then it becomes part of the ether, if you want to call that, of the city and the county and the things that happen around the bases itself. And that's why it's so important. And cities are very much a part of that implementation process. So adoption first, and that's great. I think most of the 2000s, even if you compare the 2007 and 2004 studies, what has happened is the definitions have gotten better and the information's gotten better. So I think I understand some of the things that have happened already, the train's left the station, so to speak, and we're willing to work with you on those.
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you. Then we definitely will meet, we'll talk, and we'll work towards that end. I did want to make one last announcement. Councilman McCormick, he sent me a note. He works in the evening, and he had to leave to go to work, but he wanted everybody to know how much he enjoyed the presentation as well. But I did want to let you know why he left. He did have to go to work.
Okay. Lastly, once again, thank you for the city for letting us spend some time with you tonight. Colonel Binger, to speak for him, I guess, in a sense a little bit, and it's always been a pleasure to come down here, and the city it's great to see a great crowd. I mean, it's more than I expected, and also your time is very valuable. So again, we thank you for listening, and it's been great, and we look forward to the partnership in the future. Okay.
Thank you, Colonel McCulley. Mr. Manager, any final comments before we close?
Sure, Mayor, council members, for everybody attending here, the purpose of us bringing these exhibits, so after the meeting is adjourned, we could just walk around. Hopefully the consultants will stick around for a few more minutes, and the airbase and city staff and our planners and attorneys to answer any questions. If you didn't want to ask it in public, you could just ask it in private and they will answer your questions. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank both consultants. They did an outstanding job, and thank you very much.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much for your attendance, and feel free to stick around for a few more minutes and ask questions. Thank you so much, and this meeting is adjourned.
Yes, nice to meet you. I'm talking with you on the phone. Good, I think that hits.